A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We are going to continue with the talk that we began last week. This pertained to the first to ayat number 2 through 5 of Surah Baqarah. Last week we were delayed by half hour, so we only did the presentation for half hour after that. And in that, we had covered the first of these 4 ayats. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And indeed, among these 4 ayats, perhaps this very first ayat is the most significant because it lays out for us the declaration of the book and the certainty of no doubt in it or about it. And it introduces us the concept of the guidance, and it then suggests that this guidance is particularly for al-muttaqeen. So we spent a good chunk of time last week in going through the rejection of doubt, the guidance for man, and particularly man's Allah consciousness. Those are the 3 things that I've shown you here. And today, hopefully, we will go through the remainder of the 9 particular critical and fundamental aspects that have been introduced by the Quran in these ayah. So I'll start with number 4 here today, which is al-ghaib. It appears in ayat number 3, who believe in the existence of that which is beyond the reach of human perception. So that's the portion which goes with number 4, which is al-ghaib. Now, the most common translation for al-ghaib that one finds in the Quranic translations is the unseen. However, this translation provides a very limited meaning of the concept of al-ghaib. Rather, al-ghaib is all the reality that is beyond the range of human perception and that can neither be proved nor disproved by scientific observation, or even be adequately comprised within the accepted categories of speculative thought. So in human imagination, the speculative thought, or through scientific observation, one cannot prove or disprove. That is the reality. It is the reality beyond our perception, beyond our thought process, beyond any scientific observation. Examples of these realities, for example, include the existence of Allah. We cannot imagine the existence of Allah per se in physical terms or in any other terms. A definite purpose underlying the universe. Life after death. Real nature of time. The existence of spiritual forces and their interactions. The Quran says that you have to believe in the existence of that which is beyond the reach of human perception. And all these examples of realities are beyond our reach of perception. Unless we accept this ultimate reality, the truth of this reality, we are not accepting the belief in al-ghaib. Only a person who is convinced that the ultimate reality comprises far more than man's observable environment. Only the one who is able to conceptually grasp that there is the unobservable reality, and that the ultimate reality thereby comprises both the observable and the observable reality. Only that person can attain the belief in Allah, and thus to a belief that life has meaning and purpose. In pointing this out, in effect, the Quran maintains that the Quran will, of necessity, remain a closed book to all those whose minds cannot accept this fundamental premise of al-ghaib. It is this fundamental acceptance of the ultimate reality, part of which is al-ghaib, that a Muslim bears witness to al-shahada when he says, I bear witness that there is no deity except only one, Allah. In so doing, he acknowledges that the reality I perceive through my senses and the reality that I perceive through my conceptual realization lead me to say unequivocally that there is no deity except Allah. So a Muslim who is endowed with this spiritual realization that is embedded in his shahada, in effect, realizes that the phenomena that can be observed do not comprise the whole of reality, in as much as there is a realm beyond the reach of a created being's perception, al-ghaib. This conceptual realization, the conceptual insight, as it were, leads to inner certainty in man. The Quran alludes to this following a brief but crucial narrative of Prophet Ibrahim seeking out Allah in 675, and thus we gave Abraham his first insight into Allah's mighty dominion over the heavens and the earth, and this so that he might become one of those who are inwardly sure, that is, one of those who have attained an overarching inner certainty about Allah's mighty dominion. The inner certainty of this al-ghaib, that is, of Allah's transcendental, all-embracing existence, however, is the truth that comes to man only gradually. Somebody has not muted his speaker. The inner certainty of al-ghaib is the truth that comes to man only gradually, as is alluded in Surah 6, Ayat 83, with reference again to Prophet Abraham thus, we do raise by degrees whom we will. This refers to Ibrahim's gradual grasp of truth, symbolized by his intuitive progress by degrees from an adoration of celestial bodies, the stars, the moon, the sun, ultimately to a full realization, that is the inner certainty of Allah's existence. So, al-ghaib, that is the existence of a realm that is beyond the reach of human perception, is the concept that constitutes the basic premise for an understanding of the call of the Quran and of the principle of any and every religion as such. Without this fundamental tenet, you cannot move the next step. This is so because all religious cognition arises from and is based on the fact that only a very segment of all reality is open to man's perception as well as his imagination, and that by far the much larger part of this reality, called al-ghaib in the Quran, escapes man's comprehension altogether. Per ayat 3, then, a key trait of all al-muttaqeen is that they are those who fully believe in the reality of al-ghaib as described above. We had elaborated last week on al-muttaqeen and arrived at the definition of al-muttaqeen. In these two ayat, ayat 3 and ayat 4, there are traits that are being shown by al-lazina hum. So this is the first one. Al-ghaib was the first one of those traits. The next one is constancy in one's prayer. So who believe in that which is beyond the reach of human perception and are constant in prayer. Now, constancy in one's prayers comprises the two ordained aspects of prayers. One being the ritualistic set of 5 prayers, that circumscribe the day from dawn unto the night, and the second being that which circumscribes moment-to-moment remembrance of Allah, that is dhikr. So in these various traits, what I'm doing now is I'm going to refer to several ayats of the Quran to highlight these traits. Just to give an idea that in the Quran, one will find these 5 or 6 traits that we are going to talk about today appear and pretty much circumscribe the Quran, if you will. The periodic oft-repeated 5 daily prayers bring back man periodically into the presence of Allah by abstaining during those periods from his worldly affairs. The moment-to-moment remembrance of Allah, dhikr, aspires to building and sustaining Allah's awareness and thereby becoming conscious of His zat. Together, these two ordained aspects of prayers firmly anchor the man to Allah's presence as a constant factor in his daily life. In other words, this constancy of prayers, as described above, becomes a key means for a muttaqi to sustain his taqwa. Taqwa, as the term was comprehensively described earlier in this presentation. That is last week. Ayat 132 of Surah 20, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asserts, "And bid your people to pray and persevere therein. But remember, we do not ask you to provide sustenance for us. It is we who provide sustenance to you." Razi elaborates on this in this way. Allah makes it clear that He has enjoined prayer upon man for their benefit alone, inasmuch as He Himself is sublimely exalted above any need of benefits. In other words, prayers are not meant to be considered as some kind of tribute to a jealous God, as the Old Testament in its present corrupted form frequently describes Him. Rather, prayer is meant solely as a spiritual benefit for the person who prays. A muttaqi fully appreciates, internalizes, and believes in this trait for himself. Ayat 17 and 18 of Surah 30 proclaim remembrance of Allah at all times, since the hours mentioned therein circumscribe the times of the 5 daily prayers incumbent upon a Muslim. The prayers of evening hours in the ayat refer to the prayer after sunset as well as that after nightfall. So the ayat extol then Allah's limitless glory when you enter upon the evening hours and when you rise at morn, and seeing that unto Him is due all praise in the heavens and on earth, glorify Him in the afternoon as well, and when you enter upon the hours of morn. See how it circumscribes the day and the night. The constancy in prayers, which a muttaqi believes in and incorporates in his life, is brought out also in ayat 14, partial ayat of Surah 11 thus, "And be constant in praying at the beginning and the day and the end of the day, as well as during the early watches of the night." This injunction circumscribes all the obligatory prayers without specifying either their form or exact times of their performance, both of which are clearly laid down in the Sunnah of the Prophet. Inasmuch as this verse stresses the paramount importance of prayer in general, it is safe to assume that it refers not merely to the 5 obligatory prayers, but also to a remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times of one's waking life. For a muttaqi, meanwhile, by definition, Allah's remembrance at all times is intuitive. In other words, it is as if a muttaqi is the one who remains in a state of prayers all through his waking day. The theme of constancy in prayer, similar to 1114, is laid down also in 1778. Be constant in your prayer from the time when the sun has passed its zenith till the darkness of night, and be ever mindful of its recitation at dawn. For behold, the recitation of prayer at dawn is indeed witnessed by all that is holy. Let's elaborate on this a little bit. Evidenced by the practice of the Prophet, this verse fully circumscribes the 5 daily prayers laid down in Islam as obligatory for every adult. At dawn, shortly after the sun passes its zenith, in the middle of the afternoon, immediately after the sunset and after the night has fully set in. Although parts of the Quran should be recited in every prayer, the early morning prayer is metonymically singled out as the recitation itself, the Quran, at dawn. The Prophet, under divine inspiration, used to lengthen his recitation while performing the morning Fajr prayers, thus stressing the significance of this particular prayer. The theme of Razi's opinion on the expression witness, as it says towards the end of this ayat, for behold, the recitation of prayer at dawn is indeed witnessed. Razi's opinion on the expression witnessed. The witness to which this ayat refers to is the spark of illumination in man's soul given by Allah, the heightening of his inner perception at the time when the darkness and the stillness of the night begins to give way to the life-giving light of the day, so that prayer at dawn becomes a means of attaining to deeper insight into the realm of spiritual truths, and thus of achieving communion to all that is holy. Anybody who comes to the dawn prayer, comes into the masjid, does the prayer and steps out, I'm sure sometime or the other undergoes this experience. We next move to spend freely on others who believe in the existence of that which is beyond the reach of human perception and are constant in prayer, and spend on others out of what we provide for them as sustenance. Anfaqa, family for verb, he spent, donated, contributed. Nafaq, to spend, donate for a good cause. Nafaqatan, charitable expenditure, it's a verbal noun. Yunfiquna, they spend, they donate in good cause. Plural, verb, they spend. Munfiquna, those who spend in the way of Allah. This is the active participle. In the Quran, the verb yunfiquna is always used to denote spending on others freely, whatever the positive motive may be, for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus, yunfiquna may be best defined as they spend on others freely in good causes in the way of Allah, fi sabilillah. In ayat 3 of this surah, Baqarah, spending on others is mentioned in one breath with perennial and active awareness of Allah and firm establishment of all that comprises praying. This is because it is precisely in such unselfish acts as spending freely on others that piety of a muttaqi enters into him and comes into its full fruition. Further, elsewhere in the Quran, the term yunfiquna may be understood not just as spending on one's possessions, but rather sacrificing in Allah's cause or devoting oneself to God's cause, and ultimately sacrificing or devoting one's life in Allah's way. In 262, 263 ayat of this particular surah, Baqarah, a significant qualifier and reinforcer is applied to the concept of spending freely on the others for the pleasure of Allah. Now let's look at this. They who spend their possessions for the sake of Allah and do not thereafter ruin their act of spending by stressing their own benevolence and thereby hurting the feelings of the needy, they shall have their reward with their sustainer, and no fear shall they have, and neither shall they grieve. And the next ayat, a kind word and the veiling of, that is hiding another's need, is better than a charitable deed that is followed by hurt, that is hurting the needy, and Allah is sufficient, ghani, forbearing. One may infer from these two ayat Allah's dictate in the following way: be giving, but mind your tongue and be humble. And so if you give, spend for the sake of Allah's pleasure, and speak a kind word, and veil, that is hide a needy person's need, Allah promises that you shall have neither any fear nor any grief. Rather, you shall have a multiplicity in your reward than if you were being merely charitable. As important as giving is minding your tongue and remaining forever humble. The process, the act of giving, has these two dangers associated with it. It is very easy to pump your chest up and feel almighty, and your tongue can then reflect that. Those two, watch out. A most apt discourse on charitable spending appears in 261 through 274 of Surah Baqarah, wherein ayat 262 and ayat 274 bracket the discourse with Allah's promise that those who do charitable spending shall have their reward with their sustainer, and no fear need they have, and neither shall they grieve. 3 parables are set forth in these ayat in the discourse, and Allah's 10 promises unfold within these 262 through 274. And I'll go through them just to signify how significant an aspect of giving freely, fi sabilillah, with making sure that your tongue and your humility remain within control. So 1, those who spend their possessions for the sake of Allah, Allah grants them manifold increase. 2, they who spend their possessions for the sake of Allah do not stress their benevolence, do not hurt the feelings of the needy. They shall have their rewards with the sustainer, and neither fear nor grief shall touch them. Number 3, those who spend only to be seen and praised by stressing their benevolence and thereby hurting feelings of the needy, they will deprive their own charitable deeds of all worth. That is, they will have no gains whatsoever from their good works. For Allah does not guide those who refuse to acknowledge this truth. Number 4, those who spend of their belongings out of a longing to please Allah and out of their own inner certainty that Allah will reward them for spending in His cause, these people shall receive assuredly their full rewards. Number 5, those who spend on others out of the good things that they may have acquired and not out of the bad things which they themselves would not accept, will know that Allah is self-sufficient and ever to be praised, Ghaniyun Hamidun. Number 6, those who spend on others without being felt threatened by shaitan with the prospect of poverty, Allah promises them His forgiveness and bounty. So pray to Allah, who is infinite and all-knowing, to grant you wisdom, al-hikmah, for whoever is granted wisdom has indeed been granted abundant wealth. Number 7, those who may spend whatever on others or whatever they may vow to spend, verily Allah knows it, and they will have him to succor, that is, to help them. 8, those who do deeds of charity, it is well for them. However, those who bestow charity upon the needy in secret, it will be better for them, since it will also atone some of their own bad deeds. Number 9, those who spend whatever good on others should know that it is for their own good, provided they spend on others only out of a longing for Allah's countenance, because whatever good they may spend will be repaid unto them in full, and they shall not be wronged. And number 10, those who spend on their possessions for the sake of Allah by night and by day, secretly and openly, shall have their reward with their sustainer, and no fear need they have, and neither shall they grieve. If you were to read those 14 ayats, all these 10 items that I've listed here, look at them deeply, and you will see that I have not added anything from myself. It is all in those ayats. That is what deep reflection gives you. Dwell here for a moment of reflection upon this trait of spending freely on others for Allah's pleasure. From the acceptance upon deep reflection on the notion of al-ghaib and the progression from an oral submission to a complete submission to a deeply entrenched true belief, faith in Allah's oneness, iman, all of that we discussed last week, and then making Allah's presence in your life a constant through ritual prayers and dhikr, the very first thing, the very first that Quran remarks on that involves interaction with man's fellow being is the act of charity. Spend freely on others for Allah's pleasure. After all that you went through, the first thing wherein the interaction comes in with your fellow being is spending freely on others fi sabilillah. Imagine the significance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would it be so? It is so because spending freely on others develops selfless compassion for the fellow human being. It encourages enhancement of equity between the so-called haves and have-nots. And it takes on a unique significance in such a deed, in that such a deed may very well please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Charitable stance on part of man, as described above, comprises in the Quran amongst the highest of virtues. I'll go now to the risk very briefly. When we say who believe in the existence of that which is beyond the reach of human perception and are constant in prayers and spend on others out of what we provide for them as sustenance. Contrary to the common rendering of the term sustenance risk as food and other material provisions, a more comprehensive rendition is provision of sustenance, both physical and spiritual. Risk is therefore what may be of benefit to man, whether it be concrete, like food, property, offsprings, or abstract, like piety, knowledge, etc. Put another way, risk is all that may be good or useful to man, be it of physical nature, means of physical sustenance, or belonging to the realm of the mind, means of spiritual sustenance. For example, reason, knowledge, compassion, a good word. Risk thereby applies exclusively to positive, beneficial means of sustenance and never to things or phenomena which are morally reprehensible and or physically or socially injurious. In Ayat 4 of Surah 40, the word yurzaquna connotes and has its full significance of risk. That is, all that is good and of benefit to a living being, comprising the material, the intellectual, and the spiritual. Hence, yurzaquna, they will be given substance, is rendered in Ayat 4, Surah 40 by Muhammad Asad as, they shall be blessed with good. Yurzaquna fiha bighayri hisab. They will be blessed with good beyond all reckoning. It all just gets comprised in this one good word of khair. Number 8, affirm the message of all prophets. This appears in Ayat 4. And who believe in that which has been bestowed from on high upon you, O Prophet, as well as in that which was bestowed before your time. So this is another trait for al-muttaqeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing in ayat 3 and 4. Now, underlying the call to affirm the message of all prophets is the premise that the tenet of all these messages is Islam with a lower cap, I, an unequivocal submission to the one and only deity, Allah. This remains one of the fundamental doctrines of the Quran, the doctrine of historical continuity of divine revelation, of complete submission to one only divinity, Allah. Life, so the Quran tells us, is a continuous organic process, and this law applies also to the life of the mind. Man's experience of religion, in its cumulative sense, is a part of that life of mind. Thus, the religion of Quran can be properly understood only against the background of great monotheistic faiths of the past that preceded it and which, according to Muslim belief, culminate and achieve their final formulation in the faith of Islam with an upper cap I, the religion whose guidance is the Quran. So when we, the Muslims, profess our Islam, our religion with an upper cap I, in which the guidance is the Quran, we acknowledge implicitly the Islam with lower cap I, that is the continuity of this religious belief in the oneness of Allah, which is why we affirm the message of all prophets. Any corruption is an exception to that, but ultimately, all religions have this in it, Islam, concept of Islam in it. Ours is the culmination of that, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, today I give you this Islam, and we have taken that as an upper cap I, Islam, our religion. But Islam has been through the beginning of times, which is Aslama. Ayat 15 of Surah 73 is probably the oldest Quranic reference to earlier prophets, to the historic continuity in mankind's religious experience, and by implication, to the fact that the Quran does not institute a new faith. Rather, the Quran represents only the final, the most comprehensive statement of a religion as old as mankind itself. So, for example, in Al Imran, Ayat 19, in the sight of Allah, the only true religion is man's self-surrender to Him, Islam. And in the same surah, Ayat 85, if one goes in search of a religion other than one's self-surrender unto Allah, it will never be accepted from him. Anything that deviates from Islam, self-surrender to Allah's deity, is not going to be accepted by him ever, so says the Quran. Finally, al-muttaqeen are certain in their innermost self of the life to come, al-akhirah. The word yuqinuna, translated here as they in their innermost are certain, is in fact a family 4 verb, aqana yuqinu. He was firmly certain, he is firmly certain. It appears 12 times in the Quran. Its active participle, muqinun, those who firmly believe, those who are firmly certain, appears 5 times in the Quran. And the noun yaqeen, certainty, appears 5 times. The grammatical structure of this sentence clearly points to the relative emphasis the Quran puts on the hereafter and its firm believers thus. Now pay attention to this. The literal meaning would be the same if said, yuqinuna bil akhirat. Those who know Arabic here, if they were to read yuqinuna bil akhirah, they would say, yes, this is what means, that they believe in the akhirah. Conventionally in Arabic, this is how it would be said. The verb, the action comes first, which of course is the reverse of how it is said in English, where the verbs comes first. But here the Quran deliberately reverses the conventional structure and states bil akhirati yuqinuna. It doesn't say yuqinuna bil akhirah, it says bil akhirati yuqinuna. This is the style of the Quran. Okay? The verb comes after. It does so because it elects, the Quran elects to give more emphasis on the concept of hereafter, al-akhirah, here. It is a style of Quran that is unique to Quran. But there is yet another reversal it does, the Quran does here, by way of emphasis of yuqinuna as well. It would have been sufficient to say they in their innermost are certain, but it adds the word whom. They, a pronoun, and puts it before the verb to give emphasis to these special people. This style of structuring a sentence is unique to the Quran, which repeatedly uses it to draw out the relative emphasis or emphasis per se for the reader to reflect and marvel upon. Bil akhirati hum yuqinun. Yuqinuna bil akhirati would have been sufficient. Bil akhirati brought up front to give emphasis to the reader. Pay attention to bil akhirah. But then it goes ahead and adds the verb pronoun, whom, says they, it is indeed they. And so I'll give that to you in a second. With such brevity, bil akhirati hum yuqinuna, with that brevity, structured in a style unique to Quran, the Quran succeeds in emphatically drawing the attention of the reader to both the one who is truly certain of the hereafter and the event of hereafter itself. So remarkable. Let me just go back here for a second. Last week, while discussing La Rayb Fihi, which appears 14 times in the Quran, one referring to man's term have been fixed. Number two, to multiplicity of scriptures, previous scriptures, twice to Al-Kitab, the Quran, one being in Ayat 2 here, and the other one being in Ayat 2 of Surah 32, and 10 times in the Quran, the La Rayba Fihi, no doubt about it, comes with reference to the hereafter. The Quran pays such great attention in reminding man of Al-Akhirah that it makes you reflect that if I don't believe in Akhirah, everything falls apart. And we spoke about that last week. Here at the end of Ayat 4, it pays special emphasis, put special emphasis on Akhirah by bringing in taqaddum, that word before, giving you the emphasis of that. And it says, this, those who are muttaqi, keep in mind. And it says, whom yuqinuna. How remarkable it is. Look at the coherence of the Quran. It gives you right in the beginning, La Rayba Fihi. You reflect upon it, you look into the Quran, it gives you most multiplicity of this reminder with reference to Akhirah. And then it ends in Ayat 4 with giving emphasis again to Al-Akhirah. This is the beauty of the nuance of the Quran. So now I'll just summarize on the Ayat 5 itself. where the affirmation of the positive consequences arising for such believers. We have gone last week, we've gone this week, and now comes ayat 5. Having elaborated on the believers who exercise the traits of spoken of in ayat 2, 3, and 4, ayat 5 quite succinctly then affirms that it is these believers who shall truly follow the guidance coming from their sustainer, Ulaika, and as such, it is they who shall indeed attain to a happy state of ultimate prosperity and success. 4 ayah. The first lays it down all for you so clearly. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ spends 2 more ayat in saying, who are these al-muttaqeen? Here are their traits. They are spread all over the Quran for you. We highlighted those. And then it comes and ends it by saying, Ulaika, these are the people. These are those who are muttaqeen. These are the ones who shall truly follow this guidance, this Quran coming from their sustainer. And as such, they who shall indeed attain to a happy state of ultimate prosperity and success. I'll summarize these. Introduces the Quran as guidance with an unequivocal rejection of any doubt whatsoever as to itself as the book and its contents, and a guidance for those who, having attained to faith and complete submission, are perennially and actively conscious of Allah, believe that only a small segment of the ultimate reality is open to man's perception and imagination, and that by far the larger part of that ultimate reality escapes his comprehension altogether, a concept that constitutes the basic premise for an understanding of the call of the Quran and of the principle of religion as such, al-ghaib. These muttaqeen maintain constancy in their prayers, ritual, as well as the dhikr, in the firm belief that his dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds its most consistent and deliberate expression in his constancy in such prayer. It's the constancy again and again and again, whether it's ritualistic, whether it's dhikr, again and again and again. Aqimus salata, how much emphasis? They spend freely on their material, their intellectual and their emotional sustenance on others for his and his pleasure alone, in the firm belief that it is precisely in such unselfish acts that true piety, true awareness of his existence, true consciousness enters into man and comes into its full fruition. And they believe in the doctrine of historical continuity, of divine revelation, of complete submission to one deity, Allah, that is Islam. The fact that the Quran does not institute a new faith, but represents only the final, most comprehensive statement of a religion, Islam, as old as mankind itself. And they are certain in their innermost self of the life to come, al-akhirah. Finally, ayat 5 of Surah Baqarah, by way of consequence, arises from the muttaqeen having developed the traits highlighted in 3 and 4, asserts that these people are the ones who follow truly the guidance which comes from their sustainer, and as the ultimate reward for them, for that, they shall attain to a happy state of ultimate prosperity and success. I'm sorry. Just a minute. How remarkable it is that much, if not the most, of the Quran, that is the guidance, Hudan, revolves around the concepts that are introduced immediately after the opening of the book, Al-Fatiha, right at the beginning, in these four brief ayat bring, typo here, but remarkably brief, but remarkably comprehensive ayat of Surah al Baqarah. Subhanallah. You may do the dua now.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. اللهم ادخلنا برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الجهل والوهم إلى أنوار العلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. اللهم اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك وبطاعتك عن معصيتك وبفضلك عن من سواك. اللهم بفضلك ورحمتك أعلي كلمة الحق والدين. اللهم انصر الإسلام وعز المسلمين يا أكرم الأكرمين. Oh Allah, spread your mercy upon us. Shower us with your blessings. Increase our knowledge. Grant us forgiveness. And reward us with the company of the prophets in the Firdaus al-A'la. Oh Allah, purify our heart, strengthen our faith, increase our knowledge, and make us benefit from what you have taught us. Oh Allah, forgive our parents and all our friends and relatives who have passed away. Oh Allah, make their graves garden from heaven and grant them the Firdaus al-A'la. Oh Allah, we have many of our friends and relatives who are sick. We have our son Ma'raj, our daughter Aisha Wani, and many others. Oh Allah, grant to all of them full and speedy recovery. Oh Allah, guide our children, protect them, and make them righteous. Oh Allah, we seek from you all of the good, whether we know it or we don't. And we seek your refuge from all evil, whether we know it or we don't. Oh Allah, we ask you with every name you have elected for yourself, that none of us leave this gathering, but his pains have been relieved, his worries have been removed, his debts have been paid, his weaknesses have been concealed, his sins have been forgiven, and his needs have been fulfilled. Oh Allah, we have many of our brethren who are suffering from oppression and injustice. Oh Allah, we ask you with every name you have elected for yourself to grant them victory, to heal their trauma, to protect their helpless, remove their suffering, grant them peace and prosperity, and fulfill their needs. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Subhanallah wa bihamdih, adada khalqih wa rida nafsih wa zinata arshih wa midada kalimatih. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.